Welcome everyone to the July Lunch and Learn with Pano AI. We have Arvind Satyam. I think I've got that right.
You nailed it.
I believe CEO, is that correct?
Chief Commercial Officer.
Okay, so Chief Commercial Officer. Dan Nunez with Portland General Electric. And Doug Dorr with EPRI. So they're going to give us a overview of where Pano AI has come from. They were a participant in the Incubatenergy Labs cohort, and they have gone on to much bigger and better and more awesome things. So I am going to turn it over to Arvind and go ahead.
Fantastic. Well, Joyce and Doug, thank you for the invite. Really, really appreciate being back here. It feels like coming back to our EPRI Incubatenergy family. So let me get started. And what Dan and I are going to do is we're going to tag team on this. So can you guys see can you see the slides? Good. So just by way of intro, I'm one of the founding members here. We started off our journey in the summer of 2020. I grew up in Australia as a kid, so for me, bushfires is what I saw growing up. And prior to this, I was at Cisco for over a decade, where I helped build and scale a lot of their IoT business across government and industrial environments. So really saw what advanced Internet of Things technology, AI could do in other domains. And then we saw the increasing wildfire problem, not only in the US, but in Australia, and what we're seeing in Canada and other parts. And it's really impacting multiple stakeholders. So it's really a we problem. And I think that's one of the themes that Dan and I really want to hit on. How do we bring that situational awareness to really provide the actionable intelligence to multiple stakeholders from the get-go? And when we started the company, we spoke to a lot of stakeholders to understand if the advances in technology that we're seeing in other areas is really addressing this problem. And there was a bunch of early tech in the field, but we found that there were some gaps. And I think these are the key gaps that we've really learned from utility partners. And I think the Incubatenergy program was really influential for us in the first year, where we met with Portland General, with PG&E, Xcel Energy, and SoCal Edison were also observers as part of this. And we were early, and we were really trying to understand what are the needs of the utility industry to go address this. And now we're in 6 states in the US, soon to be 4 in Australia, and I'll touch more on that. But Dan, do you want to share a quick intro as well, and then we'll jump in?
Thank you, Arvind. Yeah, so Dan Nunez, Portland General Electric, manage PG's wildfire planning analytics organization. It's been I would say, slightly over a 2-year journey with the Pano team, and it's been nothing but success. So starting from proof of concept to a full network, and we're going to touch on that more as we go through the presentation. But that's it for now, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. And one of the things that we, as a team, have really been focused on from the get-go is how do we bring and address the gaps and really create innovation that's needed for this. And I'm just really happy to share in the last 2 years from when we started Incubatenergy, there's been multiple notable awards and recognition, and 2 that I would call out. We're on a list earlier this year for Fast Company of one of the 10 most innovative AI companies to watch, and that list included NVIDIA, OpenAI, Google DeepMind. And so I think that's great, and it's our commitment to that space. And then recently, we were also selected as a World Economic Forum Technology Pioneer. In terms of funding, the company's also significantly scaled. When we started off, we're around 15 people when we started off full time. We had a bunch of consultants. Now we're 50 full time. We've more than tripled, and we just raised 45 million in total from the inception. So that's really helping us in terms of both invest in technology, but also really think about scaling. And what's very clear to us in the last 3 years is there's just an increasing demand, and there's a need from multiple states and also multiple countries. And so now we have the capacity to be deploying across multiple states. In fact, we have teams right now deploying in 4 different locations at the same time. And we're also going to be deploying aggressively in Australia starting soon as well. And then from a team perspective, we wanted to bring together folks that really bring in the technology expertise around Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, really thinking about going and deploying ruggedized hardware, really thinking about the data, the security, and those elements. But at the end of the day, this is also, we're trying to work with utility stakeholders, incident management teams, meteorology teams, line crews, and others. And at the same time, we're also trying to coordinate between a broad range of stakeholders when it comes to fire and emergency response. So it's important for us to have folks in the team that have wildland fire expertise. So we have folks in the team that have spent time in the Forest Service and BLM. We've got multiple hotshots in the team. And what that's enabled us to do is make sure that when we work with Portland General, we are going and building those bridges. We are going and building that community of stakeholders. So when you get alerts, when you get actionable intelligence, it's going to the right stakeholders. And that's kind of an evolving thing. And this is where we're collaborating very closely with Dan and the team inside of Portland General, because then we can really bring in the relationships with the local counties, with the Forest Service, with ODF, cities, etc.
Yeah,
Dan, any, please go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say it really builds instant credibility between the utility panel partners and the fire agencies who ultimately need to be engaged with the technology. So having these folks on the Pano team to speak the same language, be able to translate, and that face-to-face element with that experience has been invaluable. So that part, as I've seen it pay dividends, having the folks that come from the wildland background experience join the Pano team.
Great. And Dan, it's also been really great to see the collaboration with folks like Zach on your side that come with a fire background. And I think together we're really focused on much more of that actionable intelligence, monitoring the incidents, and really thinking about risk. In a nutshell, the solution is there's 4 key elements to it. The idea of cameras for monitoring had been around for a while, and what we wanted to do as part of the Incubatenergy pilot in 2021 was really demonstrate that there's cameras, and in our setup, there's 2 that are continuously rotating. They do a full 360-degree rotation each minute, and then we wanted to provide that as a full 360 panorama, right? And that allows any user to look at any part of that perimeter. That was one of the key gaps that we heard from the get-go, which is, in some of the systems that were deployed, you had to wait for a call, and the camera may be focused in one direction and the incident may have started elsewhere. How do we get a continuously evolving canvas, if you like, and then also apply a AI algorithm on that full 360? So in all of our setups, we apply the smoke detection algorithm on a continuously evolving landscape. The third thing that we heard is, how do we avoid noise? And so we have a fully staffed intelligence center, and their role is to look at AI alerts, but they also pull in satellite data. They're also pulling in known fires and other data sources. And they're really looking into that in the early moments to figure out, is that smoke? Or is that a dust cloud? Is that a geyser? We want to make sure that when we're sending alerts to Dan's team or to the emergency responders, we do as good a job of really making sure that it's a wildfire incident, or we're also notifying on prescribed burns in certain areas to especially to help more safely manage burns as well. So that's where it's really going from just alerting on any smoke to really trying to understand, what is the incidence of note, and then also times, right? Times of the year when it's really critical. And Dan and I will touch on a couple of incidents because it's been incredibly dry, incredibly hot in a lot of the service territories. So we've been on heightened alert. The next thing we heard, and we heard this from the Incubatenergy pilot in the first year, is utility stakeholders really wanted to understand criticality, right? So it's one thing knowing where the fire starts, but if we can really help pinpoint where is it, and then where is it relative to their service territory? So where is it relative to lines and key assets, but also to structures? And so in our system, you've got the hardware, you've got the full 360, the artificial intelligence, the intelligence center, and then that gets served up in a visual interface where we can pinpoint where is it, and that I think is really helping provide that visibility in the early moments for utilities to understand where is the risk to the assets. Dan, I'll just pause here and see if there's anything you'd add.
Yeah, I think he's captured it well. I'll offer from a utility perspective, one of the key requirements for Portland General was we were never going to have the resources to have 24/7 eyes on glass duty center. So having this platform where we minimize FTE count, trying to basically do nothing but staring at screens, we saw this as extreme value add opportunities to sort of remove that thing we were never going to be able to have, but still get the value of the early detection and situational awareness. So that was a critical requirement as we were really thinking about how do we want to build situational awareness capabilities for Portland General. And this, as Arvin indicated, really met the need as we laid out that vision.
And the beauty is that becomes a shared services center, right? So we are serving Portland General. We're also working with counties and fire agencies, and in other states, we have utility stations that are deployed, and then they're sharing feeds with local counties, et cetera. So that becomes knowledge where we're really understanding as much about fire risk in that geographical region. And I think, for us, that really helps serve multiple stakeholders. And then another key part that we heard from the industry is that utilities wanted to work with a vendor that really goes through and deploys and does this end to end, right? Working with 3 to 4 vendors adds a lot of delay, complexity, et cetera. So we took that challenge on from the get-go. So we're involved soup to nuts. And so typically we would start off and really try and understand where is the high fire risk area. Many of the utilities, have detailed wildfire mitigation plans or trying to understand their PSPS zones. So we have a GIS team that comes in and works with the utility to look at how many locations would they need to address their highest fire risk area, their next fire risk area, et cetera. And then we also pull in a very detailed tower database, whether that be publicly owned towers, municipal towers, private towers, or even other structures that really become the local maximum. Our goal is to make sure that we get creative and identify as many of these structures that are overlooking on your highest fire risk area. The next thing that we also need to think through is connectivity. And so with that in mind, we have partnerships with T-Mobile around 5G, but we also work with the other carriers. We're also working with Starlink. We have worked on microwave. We've worked on tying into Ethernet if we're deployed on ski resorts and other areas where there's comms coming through. But the goal was to make sure that we can go deploy these in areas that are really needed. And we built a lot of flexibility. We're also deployed in the outback where frankly there was no power. We worked with the stakeholders to put up a tower. It was solar. We had lots of fun challenges, which made us chuckle. We put up the solar array, and then a week later, we noticed that cows were licking the battery, and then we had to put a fence around it. But this is all the fun stuff around deploying out in the elements. We configure this. We have a factory in San Francisco, so we pull all that together, and then we go work with installers. And then post implementation, we're also focused on the support, but also the community engagement, which Dan touched on. Now, yes, go ahead.
So one key aspect about this, from soup to nuts, so PG, in perspective, has about over 1,000 circuit miles in our high fire risk zone. So the process that Arvin just described, going from sort of location to install to being able to see it through the platform, PGE was able to have all of our high fire risk zones covered with this triangulation, and visibility within about a year. And so our messaging within our plan and to our regulators from a value proposition has been, we were able to execute that investment almost instantly to help mitigate the consequences of wildfire risk, whereas the large hardening projects are decades in terms of execution time. So really thinking through, like, this process that Arvin described is actually significantly faster than all the other types of mitigations that are required for wildfire risk mitigation. And so it's a key hedge, at least we've messaged as a key hedge while we're doing these larger hardening projects. So I just wanted to put that in perspective. While there are a lot of steps, it actually goes very fast in getting the value proposition right away. That's all I wanted to add, Arvin.
Thanks, Dan. And I remember we got started in end of March, and then by the end of July, we had 16 locations up, and that's all the way from going in and signing site leases to configuration. Each tower has its own setup, and then we provisioned them into the system, and by the end of the year, we ended up with 27. And yeah, it's really quick, and we built the team to really go do that, and now we have a lot more resources that have much deeper relationships with tower owners and others. So if there's questions around just speed, can you do it in the same year? Just please reach out. We've really built this for speed from that standpoint, and I also want to thank PGE support in this, because it's truly collaborative. They work with us to fine-tune areas of interest, and we take back with them videos of drone footage on each of the towers, and then we had weekly meetings where Dan and others would approve. Otherwise, we would find other ones that are ideal points. So this was collaborative. We did the heavy lift, and then we wanted to make sure that we got it out to the utility as quickly as possible in their fire season. And this is a good example of, one of the questions is, what's the compelling reason for the utility to invest in this? And so we did a good comparison last year. The traditional way utilities get notified is there's a 911 call, and then it goes to dispatch, and then the local fire authorities would need to go and send engines out to really confirm the incident, right? To locate the incident and then coordinate resources. And then the utility gets notified if it's a known incident, if it shows up on Pulse Point or Irvin or any of the known sources. And there's many fires that start that are not known incidents. And also there's a lot of time that gets lost before it gets registered, right? And so this was an incident that we picked up literally after we deployed in this area. And at this stage, we'd onboarded the PGE wildfire team and their incident management team, and ODF was getting onboarded the week later. And it was in one of their designated, close to their PSPS zones or their high fire risk zones. And we picked up the incident. We were able to notify the location of the incident. So the triangulation is really a key aspect of this. And the PGE team were able to get this visibility very early on, within minutes. And we found that we compared it to what happened in that particular setup. ODF, it took about an hour for ODF to receive the call. It was in a really remote area and the smoke was building. And thankfully, the winds didn't pick up at that time. And then it took almost an hour for them to find the smoke amongst the trees. And I think that kind of gives you an idea of where getting the early visibility and getting the exact location, the utility here can understand exactly where it is relative to their high fire risk areas, their assets, and really think about their own risk. And that just kind of compares it. I know it's an example that kind of stretches it, but we're going to take you through some examples that we're seeing right now where it's providing a big advantage in just coordinating response and stopping forward progress.
I may offer just one element here. When we kicked it off, we talked about how it's critical that folks understand this is a we problem, not a utility problem. This particular case study, the Hong Creek fire, PGE actually received formal written feedback from the Oregon Department of Forestry that once they were onboarded and they were able to see that triangulation and how it compared to what they actually saw on site, how much time it would have saved them, it was so astounding and well received by the department that they were so grateful, and that it really launched another level of partnership with the state. And that partnership is taking it to the point where when we're getting these alerts and PG say, hey, no, we have critical infrastructure out here, and they're able to go right to it, not having to navigate 200-foot Doug fir trees trying to find the smoke in areas with really poor access. It's just been a game changer, and we've seen that over and over again, where it's not just a PGE alert, it's a PG Pano ODF thing coming together to make sure we're trying to control the fire size. So I just wanted to offer, this particular event was almost like a milestone in terms of really launching the relationships with other fire agency partners to another level.
Thanks, Dan. The next part, and Dan, I'll also hand it over to you on this one, but we also see that there's multiple stakeholders inside the utility that are using this. You know, we talked a lot about early notification of incidents when it comes to just the suppression side when wildfires start or fire starts happen, but the capability, the technology also enables the ability for other functionality, right? So one of the first ones is the meteorology team and the wildfire teams are able to look at their high fire risk areas and just really zoom in and look at fuel, look at risk, and look at vegetation and those elements. The next one is just, you know, being able to understand where is the incident, where are the high fire risk areas, what's the fuel like relative to the key assets and relative to points of interest. We also rolled out optical zoom, where you're able to look 10 miles out, 15 miles out with just incredible resolution. And this is also going to open up capability for utilities to zoom in and look at lines, especially, you know, I know, Dan, when we did this early last year, we were looking at the one that's 6 miles out. Literally, we could see if there was a bird that's sitting on top of that line. And, you know, something like this, it would take an hour or two for your line crews to go out there. And I think we're still scratching the surface around a bunch of this stuff. And, you know, and this is where we're really looking to, you know, a lot of the innovative utility partners that we're working with to understand what are the other use cases, right? And this is all just in the fire space. And we'll touch on this later on. We're also really trying to understand what are some additional areas that we can also support, and we'll touch on other stuff. Dan, anything else you would add here?
Yeah, I would just offer to Arvind your point that there is, with any new data set, new technology, there would be ongoing new value proposition, and we definitely see that. Helping with our patrols, helping inform inspections, even the idea, we actually have a location where we intentionally set the towers where we could see the view shed based on the topology out there, and also look at our substation. And with the tilting features, can check alarms, make sure they're not false alarms, and even any observed factors on the substation outdoor equipment. So it will be compounding in terms of the things you can use this tool for beyond just wildfire, landslides, other resiliency aspects, things like that.
And I think the other piece, I was at the EEI summit in Austin a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, huge discussion, and Maria Pope, and she was leading a panel with other CEOs around, you know, the increasing demands on the grid, but at the same time the pressures of climate disasters and those elements. So you've got that double whammy, and also the move towards zero carbon and the ability to use more renewable. I know in one of your areas we're also deployed close to your wind farms, right? And we're also seeing that in Australia, where we're working with players where there's going to be deployments in areas that are also high fire risk, and where they've got large renewable facilities. And I think certainly that's also going to be an area that we're going to see increased traction on.
Absolutely.
I just want to close with a couple of key examples that highlight just how the value propositions evolved. And so this is an incident that is almost a year after the Marshall Fire started in Boulder. And in this particular setup, this shows you we picked up the incident, we detected it through AI, we notified the different stakeholders. At that point, we're also partnering with Xcel and Boulder. And the big difference here is within minutes, the different stakeholders, so the Office of Emergency the state, local stakeholders on the fire side, were able to know the location. They were able to pull up through the satellite view exactly where it is, and the triangulation put it within less than 100 yards of this. They knew it was a structure fire. They were able to monitor it. They were able to think about how to deploy resources. And this is just kind of an example of how the actionable intelligence changes when you have this in an area that's got high fire risk. And we're seeing a lot of this activity in Washington and Oregon right now, which have heat warnings across multiple parts. This is a really interesting case. This started the day before 4th of July, and the Pano notification. And if you look at the feedback from the fire department below, they received the alert at 11:07 in the morning, and this was an alert that went to the utility. So it went to Dan and the utility incident management team. They knew it was extreme weather, and I'll let Dan kind of talk about the setup there. But the utility received the alert, and then we shared it with the different stakeholders locally. The next thing that we were able to do, similar to the Boulder example, they were able to see exactly where it is in terms of the satellite view relative to structures, any assets. But the other thing that was really compelling, and we've just rolled this out this year, is optical zoom, being able to look 5-10 miles out with 30x visibility and really understand how that fire is behaving. And that's been a game changer, both in terms of how to coordinate resources for the utility, really understanding is it moving towards structures and assets, but also safety of personnel on the utility side, on the emergency response side. And so this particular notification, it took 20 minutes for any specific intel to be called in. By this stage, we'd already sent information on where it started. We already had optical zoom active, so they had eyes on the incident. And Dan, if you can share a little bit about how this really helped the resources and stop forward progress.
Absolutely, yeah. This particular area, it's really obvious from just looking at the pictures, on the west side of our service territory. It's essentially with the limited resources, both from fire suppression and access, on an offshore east wind out here, there's nothing stopping a fire from burning to the coast. So we rely, and in fact, that particular fire agency is primarily a volunteer station. So being able, and we heard this in person yesterday from Chief Law, that the ability to actually be on site, driving there before 911 came in, having engines ready to go to stop before throw is just absolutely critical, because this is a potential mega fire, and if every minute counts. You know, you think of Paradise and how quickly things can move when you have we are in red flag conditions at this time. So when you don't have ideal fire weather conditions and you don't have fire response getting there for minutes, that sets you up for a potential disaster situation. And it was a success in that it proved its use case. It only takes one of these incidents to pay for itself. So yeah, nothing really else to add there. Go ahead, Armin.
Absolutely. And I know from the moment we notified, the relative humidity dipped, which also just increases the fire risk. And I know the winds also picked up from 10 miles to about 20 plus miles. So I think that this clearly shows the value of those the early intel. This is an incident that we notified. It started off in a remote area, and as I was reading the incident reports for this, it was really steep terrain. We picked it up, notified. This really talks about the we when it comes to response, because there were many stakeholders that were involved, and they were watching a lot of this footage. I actually have a little bit of the video to share on this one. But what's interesting here is you had the Forest Service, you had ODF, you had Clackamas County, you had some correctional folks all involved, and there were multiple planes and a helicopter on this incident. And again, I think this is where being able to pick it up, being able to identified in remote locations and provide that actionable intel really helps. I'm just going to share, just play the Loom video. This is the footage. And Dan, and as I play this, anything you would add, offer up on this incident?
Yeah, this is another example of where fires start for many reasons, lightning, human cause, etc. And so this particular fire was very close to PG facilities, parks. And so being able to start potential evacuation processes for our campgrounds, alert our generation facilities that there was a potential chance of fire spread into critical infrastructure, including transmission, all happened near instantly with the identification of this fire. So it's not just coordinating the fire response, going back to what Arwen talked about, it's being able to map distance to critical assets, whether it's a real property asset or it's a generation or transmission asset. All of that was able to happen near instantaneously to help them get PGE into action. So nothing else to add. It's this particular fire is just a great example where it all came together.
And Dan, I know the optical zoom functionality that we're looking at here. I heard that many stakeholders were really watching this throughout to really get that situational intel in terms of resource deployment. And I know it's rolled out this season, but thankfully it's really helping out on a lot of these incidents.
Absolutely. Yep.
Great, and I think we just have three more slides, and then we will open it up to Q&A. The other use case that we wanted to highlight was around prescribed burns, right? So we spoke a lot about suppression, but prevention and really helping stakeholders and helping communities and others really think about fuel mitigation and preparedness has been really important. The technology allows for alerts and really understanding fire starts when you have large prescribed burns. So this was one in Aspen that happened last year. And the video is really visually impressive on this. They planned for this for over 5 years. They use cluster bombs to really go do this. And the prescription window was 3 p.m. on a Friday afternoon. They had a very tight window. And the big difference here is there were 4 different locations where you could see this large burn. And over the next 3 days, they were able to quickly pinpoint any fire start and figure out, is it on the interior? Is it on the exterior? How do we think about responding? And there's been increasing focus around just how do you do safer prescribed burns. If we look at the incidents that happened in Canada, the really unfortunate incidents that are still happening, it started very early in the season. There was a lot of fuel, and I think preparedness is a big part of the focus. And we're also really trying to understand how the technology can help safer prescribed burns as well. And then lastly, we touched on this early, but this really is a we and collaborative effort. And one of the things we've been doing in partnership with Portland General is really building awareness and building those tight bonds between the fire and emergency response teams in the area. We've done multiple user group meetings. We had one, the one on the top left-hand corner where Dan and I look like we're extras from the Goodfellas. This was at Sandy Fire. It was great. Chief Schneider and team have been amazing partners with us. And we also did a press event there yesterday, which Dan did with our CEO, Sonia. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, I spoke with Maria Pope, Portland General CEO, at an event in Seattle earlier this year. And that was with a broad range of stakeholders, including regulators and others, explaining how this type of technology can add value, reduce risk, and really provide that situational awareness. So this is really where it's technology really providing value, but also doing that community engagement, and that activation is just critical piece of it. So we wanted to make sure from the get-go that it wasn't just build it and kind of provide the technology. We really look at this as actionable intelligence, and we want to be there as part of that journey. And we want to really work with you guys through that process. And just last slide on this. This was a user group meeting that we did earlier this year. There was almost 50 stakeholders. This was at PGE's training facility. Bill Mesner was sharing kind of the broader elements around wildfire mitigation and risks that they're doing, and how our solution has really helped around the situational awareness piece. And it also allowed us to bring together stakeholders from the Forest Service and ODF and local county and emergency management and dispatch and other stakeholders, so that when there's incidents, people know, they get shared the alerts, they're able to see the footage, you're able to marshal resources really quickly, and it's all hands on deck. And it really ties to that we element. Dan, anything else you would add here?
It was also a great opportunity for our regulator to see how all these agencies and partners need to come together to embrace technology. So in general, it's a space where it's moving so quickly from a learning perspective and sharing perspective, that having people get to see how these different use cases and departments work together was another value add from a networking perspective.
Thanks, Dan. And I'm in Austin and I just finished up at the NARUC Summit the last 2 days. I spoke at the one in New Orleans, the annual summit last year. And what's interesting is that the regulators are really, they really want to understand new innovations that are out there, especially innovations that can really help provide additional visibility, help provide the situational awareness. So I think just the education, more awareness to the regulators, something we continue to do in partnership with the utilities, but also working closely with NARUC and other organizations as well. With that, Doug, that's what we had, and we wanted to open it up to Q&A.
Awesome. Well, that was fantastic. I really appreciate that that EPRI was able to be in on the ground floor on this a few years ago, when we were first approached about the Incubatenergy project, and this idea of detecting smoke before the traditional calls come into 911 or the emergency response folks was compelling. And it was interesting, and everybody was asking those questions about, well, how do you tell the difference between that and clouds and fog and all those things that you guys have resolved over time. So really appreciative that we were able to see this from the startup to where it's at today. So I'll just throw a couple of questions out, and what I'd like to encourage everybody on the call to do is put your questions in the chat if you have any, and Joyce will monitor the chat, or you can just come off mute and ask directly the questions to our presenters. But I will just put two of them out there. So success in this space means that we're not going to have those giant disasters that we're seeing a lot more of today, because somebody has responded fast, and maybe a water helicopter's been dispatched and the fire's been put out. So success kind of is hidden in a way. So what I'll ask both of you is, do you have an example of a case where you think if the cameras would have been in place, we would have had a different outcome than we've had with the disaster that occurred? And then the second piece of it is thinking about other data layers, whether that's temperature or moisture or weather, wind. What other data layer would you like to see in the future if we're looking out 5 years from now? So those two questions, I'll just leave it to you guys to kind of hash those out.
Awesome. Well, I'll take the first one on. So Doug, it's one of those things where you have it, you do a good job, and the incident stays small, right? And we've taken you through multiple incidents of those. maybe one way to look at this is what are the elements that start megafires, right? And what we're seeing is, you've got increasing megafires because there's a lot of dry, windy, high fire risk areas. There's a lot of areas that are tinderboxes, and every large fire starts small. So the early moments really matter, right? We gave you the example of the Kutch fire, and Dan was talking about how the winds pick up, that goes all the way to the coast. And I think that's just a great example of being able to notify, get that early situational intel that allows you to monitor exactly what's going on, figure out how to go marshal resources. We've had multiple incidents in areas that are really remote, places like Montana, where we're able to notify, get that early visibility, and then send it over to dispatch, send it over to get aerial attack on the incident. If I back into it on other incidents, I think what I would say is just when you see these major incidents in many of these situations, it's because, one, you've not been able to get to it faster because it's in really remote areas. There's a lot of fuel and the wind's picked up, and then it's really hard to catch it afterwards. So all I would say is the early intel definitely is proving to be helpful in all the areas that we've been deployed. And touch wood, I want to be careful every time I say this. So far, since we've been deployed, there's not been a major incident. And I think, what we can do is just provide that actionable intelligence. And then there are elements that, in terms of response, and then there's stuff that happens from an environmental conditions, right? Winds picking up, that, the best we can do is to get the intel. Dan?
Yeah, I'll offer, Doug, it will bleed into your second question. Our state has the driest soil conditions in roughly 84 years. And so the stress to vegetation, what that means is we are going to have multiple times where there's a lot of fires going on. And so being able to integrate the meteorological fire weather, which you talked about, relative humidity, temperature, sustained gusts, wind speeds, energy release components, bringing all that together to help prioritize what ignitions or what fires are likely to be the ones that are most catastrophic as these fire seasons get longer, and you're going to have multiple fire starts. I think that is what I'd like to see, and we've already talked with Pano and kind of laid out a vision how that's something on how we can build those weather integrations in those systems. But in general, it will meet the spirit of your question that there's going to be a lot of fires, and being able to help prioritize to the fires requires another deeper level of understanding of what's the fire likely to do. And so, to Arvin's point, right now we're providing visibility to everything, and that's part of it will help up informing prioritization, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And just building on top of that, in terms of critical data points that I think will be helpful, weather information like lightning, right? A lot of if you look at the Canadian scenario, there's been huge amount of lightning activity, and especially when it happens in remote areas at early in the morning, at nighttime, etc. It's really hard to get understanding of that. So being able to pull that in, wind speed, relative humidity, these elements. So we definitely have that as part of the spec. I think the other stuff we're also looking at is any visibility that we can provide around fuel and vegetation. So before an incident starts, and then to Dan's point, what is the additional intelligence around spread, right? And providing visual intelligence to enable better determination around spread. And I think these are all things as we continue to evolve. And this is where we absolutely work closely with our utility partners and others to understand, hey, how is this helping you today? What are some areas that we can do in our future? So we just hired a VP of engineering who had a 500-person AI team at Facebook. So we're really doubling down on the innovation side of it. So inputs are welcome. Matt, I think you have a question. Hey, Matt.
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Yeah, good
to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for the great presentation and just another great story. I actually had a kind of a two-part question, and it's kind of a reminder for me, but then also Dan, partly for you too. So as you continue to build out your fleet and supporting different energy providers and the utilities, remind me how your management of that data and that feed of data is managed. Is it managed partly with Pano and then also in-house at the utilities? And then how does that integration or that engagement work? And then the second part of the question is kind of for your area, Dan, and any others on the line from the utility space is, how has that data management evolved since you've been deploying the assets, and how are you also perhaps using that data and the AI to inform maybe some derivative applications for the utility? For example, from another resiliency perspective, are you able to use some of the data to inform other derivative applications?
Great. In terms of the management of the data, so if you look at the primary source, so it's cameras that are collecting the landscape, right? So it's visual imagery of the environment. We're capturing that footage, and we store that in the secure cloud, and we're running the AI on top of that. The utility gets a private instance. This is not a public system; it's a secure private system where the utility stakeholders are getting that visual. And right now, we're just pulling in publicly available transmission data, and then as we go through security with a number of the utilities, there are other data that we will bring in. But at the same time, we're also sharing this footage with the utility. And I know utilities, and we visited Portland General's just incredible IOC, which, by the way, I would recommend others go visit it. It's stunning. We know that it's this type of data helps the transmission side, the distribution side, the incident management side. So there's many other elements that are tied in. So we share that in, and then there's many things that the utilities do on their side. But that's how we do it on our side. Dan?
Yeah, there's two parts to your question. One that's got direct financial benefit we've been able to help leverage from the cameras is there's a lot of claims come through utilities and asset owners all the time for a variety of reasons. And so PG has a fire investigatory division that helps with, look at these claims. But having the cameras and the optical zoom and being able to pinpoint where these fires started has actually been a meaningful evidence perspective about making sure that what are claims that PG really has good data on, or what are areas that we need to spend more time with our resources investigating. So we're getting some efficiencies from our employees that have to go through that as claims processes. And the second part of that is our regulatory environment wants more, and and it's a fair ask, because the sensitivity around wildfire with the impacts and potential costs, impacts to rates, means making sure we're able to demonstrate prudency. And what are the things that we're doing to really mitigate the risk? And are they the best value investments for our customers? And so with this data, we're also able to track how many fires do we have? Because when you look at fire legacy databases, for example, you really have to know the nuance of what was captured in those data sets. So having the footage that actually goes with the number of events, where they occurred, how quickly they grew, that is something that we're able to put into our WMPs, or wildfire mitigation plans, and share with our regulators. So it's really giving, again, just more of that credibility and trust that, hey, these fires are real. This is how we're tracking all of that. It's beyond just how we can get efficiencies. It's also showing the fact that the risk is changing over time, and this is how we can. This is one of the ways to demonstrate that complexity. So I'll pause there and see if that helps.
No, that's great. Yeah, I think that's a really good some ancillary benefits of the data and the use and the application that I was interested in hearing a little bit more about, since we've seen Pano's products deployed and some other technologies as well, just to find ways that we can use some of that data in other applications to show that risk reduction. So yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot.
you.